Military Series is brought to you by Dominion Strength, weightlifting belts, and Micro Gains fractional plates. You know, you would never go into training or combat without the proper gear, and from the very beginning of your strength journey, you need the proper fractional plates and a weightlifting belt, both of which will last a lifetime. Most gyms, including military gyms, don't have plates less than 5 pounds, and in order to make smooth incremental increases, you'll need fractional plates. You know, those plates that are 1 pound, 1.25 pounds, and 2.5 pounds. Micro Gains sells entire sets that easily fit in your gym bag so that you're ready to hit your prescribed numbers anywhere you train, anytime you train. And everyone knows that every serious lifter needs a weightlifting belt to help them stay tight and protect you during heavy lifting. Dominion Strength makes the finest all-leather weightlifting belts on the planet, and best of all, both Dominion Strength and Micro Gains are American-owned small businesses, and 100% of their products are produced and shipped right here in the US of A. Go to dominionstrength.com or microgains.com, that's microgainz.com, and use discount code LOGIC at either one of our partner companies to receive a significant discount off your purchase from either of these wonderful companies. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Dominionstrength.com or microgains.com. Get the best weightlifting belt and fractional plates on the market.
Welcome, everyone, to the Barbell Logic Military Series. I'm your host, Nikki Sims, along with host Matt Reynolds. Before we begin, we'd like to say that the views expressed in this series do not necessarily represent those of the Department of Defense or the United States government.
Welcome to the Barbell Logic Podcast, another episode of the Military Series, and I'm joined again by Colin Slade, who is a block staff member, staff coach for us on the sales team as well, and really one of our primary people on staff who connect with military services. And so you're also a captain in the Air Force. I know you did 7 years of active duty, and you're currently a reservist. This is the second time you've been on the podcast for the series, so welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
We want to talk a little bit today about kind of the general arc, like kind of what the fitness lifeline looks or lifetime arc looks like for your military member, and maybe what is common or normal, and also what we think might even be better, although I think that things are a changing for the better anyway, so they're moving in the right direction. Let's start there. Like, what have you seen, and what do you know in picking the brains of other military members what does this fitness arc sort of look like?
Yeah, it's a really good thing for us to consider when we're looking at the requirements to serve in the military to begin with, right?
Sure.
That's where this kind of all begins, is that what we call the accessions process or the recruiting process. And so anybody that wants to come into the military, they must meet very specific guidelines before they're ever allowed to put the uniform on, right?
Sure.
And so we've covered those standards throughout this podcast series, but I want to emphasize the point that those physical requirements, those are required by law. So it is written into U.S. Code Title 10 that anybody who wants to serve in the military must meet certain physical and medical requirements. Now, the exact requirements, they are not stipulated in the law itself. Rather, each of the different services are given the ability, the flexibility to define what those fitness requirements are going to be. But when you're talking about bringing in hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of people into the military every single year, then what you are able to measure them on has to be something that is scalable across an entire organization, right?
Sure.
And so that usually means that you're going to measure them on something that is very simple to do.
Sure.
That doesn't require a lot of equipment, that's cheap and easy to assess. And the other thing to consider is that when these requirements were first put into place, back in the 1960s and 70s, the culture of fitness just in general within the country was in a very different place then than it is now. People were very into the running era, the calisthenics, that sort of thing. And so that became kind of like the de facto default answer for the accessions and recruiting processes. Let's measure people's ability to run and do push-ups and do sit-ups or crunches, pull-ups in some circumstances. And so the health and fitness arc of the military member begins there by being recruited into the military. They run, they do push-ups and sit-ups. And if they are able to pass those requirements, then they can start the rest of their military journey and the fitness that goes along with it.
So there's a base standard that they have to meet to even enter in and go to basic training. Is that?
Yep.
And then I assume there's a goal over the course of basic training to improve fitness as well over the course of that. So is it the same PFT that an 18-year-old kid fresh out of high school hasn't actually officially started boot camp or basic yet? Is it the same PFT that he's subjected to or she's subjected to before they go in that they're going to continue to be tested on throughout the life of their career?
Yeah, for the most part. There will be some additional fitness standards depending on the career field that they're going to go into. Like, for example, if they want to go into special operations, they're going to have a much higher fitness standard to do those things as opposed to the rest of the force.
Yeah, I get it. I remember, seeing kids when I was a high school teacher, kids that knew that they were going to go in the military. And a lot of times they would be in ROTC in high school and they would be trying to practice some of these skills, different skills that they would have to acquire or needed to know to kind of give them a leg up before they went to basic. And one of the things that they would do is obviously they would practice these things. They would be doing push-ups all the time. They'd be doing runs as a group of high school kids in preparation for going off and serving in the military. And so they start there, right? And I'm sure a lot don't. A lot just start having not been in ROTC or anything that prepped them.
Yeah.
And then what does the process kind of look like? What do you see over the life of the military member? I mean, do the majority of the members in the military tend to continue to gravitate deeply into running, cardiovascular fitness, body weight work? Or over time, are we seeing more and more often them transition more into understanding the need for strength training or anything else, anything that's even outside of those basic standards?
Yeah, I would say that there is a balance of both. And here's where I think that the military fitness culture is at. That once you pass those initial standards, you have graduated your accession source, be that a basic military training, basic combat training, or you go through a commissioning program to become an officer. Once you've graduated, the deliberate development of your physical fitness stops. The military no longer makes the effort to try and grow your ability to be physically fit. Now, there will still be certain events or activities organized around fitness, like units will do a unit PT. Everybody will get together and go on like a fun run, a ruck march, or something along those lines, where something that you can do as a large group, again, that's pretty cheap. And
that you're going to run at the speed of the slowest person.
For sure.
Right. So you've got one guy that's dying, and most of the rest of the group is like, we're just trotting along here. It's not that big of a deal.
Just wasting their time, really, because they could be using that time to do something else. But these types of mandatory events, everybody has to be there, right?
Sure.
And so, like what I was saying, is the deliberate development of the physical fitness stops. And so people will gravitate toward the thing that they are good at, or the thing that they enjoy, or just the thing that's available to them. So if they're on a base that has a fully stocked gym with racks and bars and all of those things, people will go and use them. There are functional fitness centers across installations throughout the DoD that get very well utilized, and people get the benefit from it. However, there's still such a holdover from that cardio and calisthenics culture, so that within those same gyms, you're also going to see 1,000 treadmills and all of the cable machines and stuff like that. So really, members of the military get to choose from this smorgasbord of whatever they want to do, as long as the installation makes it available to them.
Sure. That makes sense. And then they continue to still have to be tested on their branch's version of the PFT.
Right.
Every year, is it tend to be like once a year? Is that average?
Yeah, that's the typical cycle for testing, is every year or so.
So one of the arguments I think that you're going to make, and that we've made some on the series as a whole, is that we take care in Barbell Logic is to make sure that we are still training our military members to really do well on the PFT, to crush the PFT,
right,
to continue to improve based on the standards, because they're tied back to rankings. I mean, it's important to be able to continue to improve, while at the same time trying to understand what are the real needs of a military member, of a soldier, of a Marine, of an airman, right, of a sailor, what are their physical needs? And so really, and I realize that for people listening in here, there's probably a little bit of a duh sort of moment, but let's take just a second and talk about like, why is fitness such an important component for employment at all? Like, what is the main focus? And again, I think if I ask that question to people who are civilians in general, they're going to be like, well, like, obviously you got to be in shape to be able to, be a soldier. But it actually really comes back to readiness, right? Like, that's really what the military is trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So you asked the question, why does the military need to be fit? Because we don't know what's coming. We need to be prepared for the unexpected, whatever that means, and in a position where we can succeed regardless of the environment that we have to fight in. Now, the biggest part of the military, the vast majority of people are not going to be in combat, and that's fine, right? They're in support roles. They're enabling those frontline soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen, whatever, to go and take the fight to the enemy. But they still need to have a baseline of fitness in order to be capable in their job, some of which are very physical, some are not. They're more of like the knowledge ops, desk work sort of thing. But even in those kinds of situations, we want to make sure that the members of the military are not going to be a drag on the system. We've seen, just in the corporate world, that people who are not physically fit are not as good at doing their job and are often a risk to the business because they're far more likely to get injured just in day-to-day life. And so that removes them from the ability to do their job. And that is then going to have a follow-on effect down the support and logistics line. Somebody missing from their desk job may be the difference between success or failure on the front lines in the military. And so we don't have just an unlimited number of bodies that we can throw at all of these problems. We need everybody who wears the uniform to be on their A game at all times. And being physically fit, mentally fit, spiritually and mentally resilient is part of all of that. And deliberately training somebody and developing that level of fitness over the course of a career is absolutely critical to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most simple ways to achieve that thing, right? I mean, from a perspective of doing that kind of voluntary hardship thing, we can't and don't want to just set someone in a combat scenario having not gone through other hard things to prepare them. That's what the military is doing when you're not in combat scenarios. You're preparing them to be in these like really hard periods of time. And so what better, and not just that, so not even just to be on a singular personal level ready, but also what sort of things outside of combat build more camaraderie and morale and connection as a group and trust than training together, right? This is a thing that we know improves for everybody. And this is an argument we've made for years, obviously not just for the military, for literally everybody, for that executive, business executive, for the mom, for the dad, for the husband, for the wife. It just is a general thing. And I know you and I have talked, offline lots of times before. We have many similar value systems. I know that strength training is not the single most important thing in the whole world, right? There are other things that are more important. Like my relationship with my wife and my kids and the way I interact with my community is more important than my strength training. But my strength training makes all those other things better, especially if I do it for the right reasons, right? If I'm doing it so that I can be healthy and strong and resilient and those things. And so obviously my needs as in doing strength training, there is a standard for me that is entirely personal. Right. But the standards for the military member become far greater because what you're doing is far greater than oneself. Like you are literally here to defend the United States of America. Yeah. And so there is a real need there to make sure that these military members are combat ready. So what I continue to hear from in having these conversations with especially, high-ranking officers is that PFT really does matter. And it matters because they have to meet the standards. But what matters even above that is we want combat readiness, because when someone isn't combat ready, when someone is injured, when someone is hurt, it actually pulls them completely away from the group, the company, the battalion, whatever they're in. It puts them in medical. They can't build the camaraderie and the teamwork and the trust. They're not able to continue to improve their skills. And so it becomes a real problem. So I think one of the first places we argue for strength training, because I don't think the military ever really cares that much about how much your squat is or how much your deadlift is, but it's actually comes back to that resilience piece, right? Like we see that people who strength train correctly get injured far less than people who don't.
Yeah, absolutely. The argument that you're making about these things being true for the business world is absolutely correct. That people who are injured or sick or incapable of doing their job, they can't connect with the people in their company either, right? They can't help the business move forward. But the difference between the private business world or the nonprofit world versus what we do in the military, and you could also extend this to law enforcement, first responders, that sort of thing.
Sure.
The price or the cost of getting this wrong, of somebody being injured or not able to participate in the business of projecting power, participating in combat, that sort of thing, the stakes are far more higher. The cost is far greater, right? I mean, when you're dealing with life and death type of situations, you want to make sure that everybody who is involved in it, from the front line all the way to the person who's pushing papers back at the base, is 100% ready at all times to support that effort.
Yep, that's good. So I think what I've heard you say and what I've heard others say on the series is that the reasoning behind the need for fitness for the military is good. It's well-intentioned. Yes. They want these members in the military to be combat ready. And then there are these standards that say, like, these are some of the fitness standards that we think you need. And again, we may not entirely agree with all of those, certainly.
Well, we agree that there should be a standard.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. So it's that, could there be better standards? But I don't know how much the Pentagon's going to listen to me and say, or whoever is going to listen to me and say, let's change the standards. But so my next question is, maybe more importantly, is if they recognize correctly that combat readiness is the most important thing and that physical fitness is extremely important and a huge part of combat readiness, the question is, what are they actually doing about it to make sure that our military members are where they need to be combat ready?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, the deliberate development of the military member, of the individual, stops as soon as they graduate and come into the military, right? But even with that, there have been awakenings within the military, and we've addressed some of those within this podcast series, that some of the branches are making changes and skewing things towards the development and the testing of strength. And that's a good thing. That's wonderful for the military. That's good for the American people, right? But it needs to be greater. There needs to be more, right? They need to scale this across an entire United States Armed Forces, across the entire DoD. And the way that we get there, there can be this top-down deployment of new standards, such as the Army's new ACFT, the Army Combat Fitness Test, where someone in a back room somewhere came up with these different standards, and now they're pushing them out.
It's like the trap bar deadlift.
Trap bar deadlift, and leg tuck,
that we're seeing.
Medicine ball throw.
So better,
right,
but not quite right, but still, like, it's a move in the right direction.
We're not going to knock that at all. We see that there is value in that, even if they don't test things like we would exactly do it, right? We're still grateful for the change. But what hasn't happened has been scaling that at the individual level for individual soldiers. And we can see in the tea leaves that this is probably going to be the way that the Air Force goes, maybe the Marines, eventually the Navy might pick up something like this, where there's a far more greater emphasis on the strength, the testing of strength, than there has been previously. But how do you scale this across the individual? We've talked about this, that the Army and the military as a whole has a logistical problem, right? That they cannot provide individualized coaching to every single person, because that's not what the military is for. That's not what the military is designed to do. Now, they try. They will send people to different schools to get like their master fitness training certification or other things like that, have dedicated people within the military, whether wearing the uniform or contractors or something like that, to provide some instruction, but they're not experts. A weekend seminar or 2 weeks to earn a certification does not make you an expert coach.
Sure. Just like it doesn't make you an expert anything, by the way, right? Like, you can't go to a weekend seminar, and be an expert sharpshooter after a weekend. Like, I am now an expert. I'm a sniper. No, we can't do that in 3 days, right? Like, and that's what's crazy, is it feels like the world fully understands that with most of these issues. Do you think it has to do with strength training specifically And even things like running, which tend to be like, it's like, how hard is it to learn how to run? Well, honestly, like there's a significant amount of form that goes into running to make sure, again, for combat readiness, that we don't get shin splints, that we're not bouncing off our heels. We understand how to push off the ball of our foot. I mean, little things like that. Do you think it's because those things are sort of looked at as a simple, Cro-Magnon sort of like, hey man, there's the barbell, there's some weights, I don't know, pick it up, put it on your back, squat down, do whatever, bench press. Like it's seen as like, do you think people just don't recognize how much complexity there is for this sort of thing? And they're like, yeah, how hard could it be to learn how to do this stuff in a weekend?
Yeah, that is absolutely the case, is that people are just not aware of what it takes to actually get good at, one, lifting yourself, like doing the technique with your own body, but then two, being able to teach and coach that to somebody else. They don't realize how difficult that actually is. And so if we want to change the military fitness culture and not just get people, running is still going to be a thing. And I don't want to be the person who says that running should completely disappear. I don't think that it should be tested, but I think that it should still be part of what we do in the military. But if we want to change the culture away from cardio and calisthenics and skew it towards the deliberate development of strength over the course of a career, then we not only need to develop the awareness and the desire for change toward that thing on the individual level, pursuing that activity, but also for coaching, to get the military to recognize that there is value in providing an individualized coaching experience for every single person who wears the uniform. And that's going to take a lot of effort in order to make that happen. If we want the military to do that, to provide coaching to every single person who is currently serving, then we need to, one, raise the awareness, two, demonstrate the need for that desire, kindle that fire within them to pursue expert coaching for everybody, and then outline those logistical constraints that we've been talking about, that it's just not feasible for the military to provide internally a coach for every single person. And maybe they could figure it out. They could throw enough money at it to make that happen. But would they be good at it? Probably not, because that's not what the military is for. That's not what we do. And so they should outsource that. And yes, I'm obviously making a pitch here for the services that we provide at Barbell Logic, but it doesn't have to be just us. There are lots of different ways that this could happen.
Right, exactly.
But they should outsource it, like they do many other support elements of the military, to expert coaches who actually know how to get somebody strong, and also have maybe some of that internal knowledge of what it's like to wear the uniform. Hire somebody like me who is currently serving, so I speak the language, I understand the culture, I can help members of the military to achieve that development over the course of a career, right? And not only just hire coaches who are capable of doing that, but then leveraging the technology and the capability of online systems in order to scale that across an entire organization, no matter where they are, who they are, what they're involved in. And so I see that there is a perfect fit for Barbell Logic to support members of the military in this type of endeavor, to help them from the very, very beginning of getting into the military, then across an entire career, deployments and all, and then on their way out, when they finally decide to take the uniform off, to grow their strength and their fitness for that entire life of their time in the military.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to go back for a second and talk a little bit about top down versus bottom up, because it's been one of the things that we're trying to figure out exactly the right way to do this. It's awfully difficult to break into the top and come top down, especially without the significant amount of hard data that you can take that you can take up the ladder and show them that this works. And so one of the things I think that we would love, hey, listen, if you're some 4-star general in the Army or some other
4-star in any branch,
if you want to hire us for the entire branch, we'll make it happen, right? We'll figure out the logistics. But ultimately, I think what we have found and what we are doing is that one of the things that we've been able to do already is we have a significant number of clients already who are individual service members who have hired us on their own dime to train them. And so to be able to collect aggregate data on them, right? Not to share specific personal data with anybody, but to be able to collect aggregate data on that to show, here's what we've seen from the actual standards that they're branch of service has passed down. We want to make sure that they don't just, I don't want to just meet the standards. I want to exceed and like crush them, right? Because I think that's one of the things that makes somebody then look and go, whoa, what's that person doing? And while at the same time focusing on strength in order to make sure that we are trying to develop, create an optimal soldier, somebody that I would think of, like that I think most of us would think of as, you know, if I think of like the badass soldier, military member, right? So, you know, you're thinking of the badass. You're thinking of the guy who can, yes, he can go out and run 3 miles in under 20 minutes and 19 minutes, but also pretty jacked, not 285 jacked, 220 jacked, right? 220, 6 foot tall, got muscle on him, has a motor that'll go forever. The kind of guy that, let me actually take it out of the military for a second. We went and did a private seminar a few years ago in a major city for their entire fire department, big city, major city in Texas. And, you know, their firemen, fire persons across the board were pretty weak. Yeah. Really into CrossFit. By the way, I understand why they were really into CrossFit. I also understand why CrossFit exploded in 2008, 2009. Our military is in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it was like the perfect, you know, let's swing ammo cans and we don't even have to have access to all this stuff, right? We can do this thing and we can build camaraderie together and whatnot. But here's what we found. There was this guy, this fireman, who was like 5'10" and probably 235 and could keep up with anybody on a cardiovascular fitness run, piece, Metcon. And then we did the strength training at the seminar, and the guy squatted like 535 for a triple and deadlifted 635 for a triple. And I was like, okay, listen. And at one point I just stopped the room and I said, if I'm on the 4th floor of a burning building, that's the guy that I want pulling my body out. The rest of you can't do it. I weigh 285. There is no way, there is not another person in this room who can get my body off of a 4th floor, but that guy can. So when they were like, well, how should we, you know, like ultimately you're getting ready to leave the seminar, like trying to set them up on like, you know, they're asking, how should we train? Where do we go from here? I'm like, do what he's doing. Listen to that guy. He's really smart and knows what he's doing. Like he has decided to set the standard so far beyond whatever the fire person standards are for that specific city. And I think that there is certainly, we can start to make a splash on, and it's far easier and has a far lower barrier to entry to be able to reach out to individual service members and go, hey, here's the thing. We can coach you at Barbell Logic. And again, there are certainly other places who can coach you well, and there are other great expert coaches that aren't just us, so we're not trying to have a monopoly there. That's not what we're saying. But one of the things that I love about Barbell Logic is that, and what we've seen has been a positive impact for these service members, is that they can literally train anywhere they want, anytime they want, right? They're moving around all the time. They're in 3 different cities in the United States over the course of an 18-month period. Then they get overseas. They're in Germany for a while, and then they're in the Middle East. And here's what we found now, especially, and this wasn't even the case in 2008, 2009, and certainly not before that, but now literally almost anywhere they go, we've got guys that are in like sub-Saharan Africa, and they ship these shipping containers to where they are, and the shipping containers are full of gym equipment, like a CrossFit rig, and they pull the rig out and they mount it to the outside of the shipping container, and the weights and the bars on the inside of the shipping container, and they can squat, they can deadlift, they can bench press, they can press, and of course we can do high intensity interval training and train their cardiovascular system. We can do the body weight work, we can do chins and dips and push-ups and sit-ups and all the things that they should do. And the other thing that's crazy with technology is almost everybody has access to a cell phone and cell phone service. I've gone in the middle of nowhere Haiti before. I mean, Haiti. And I still can stand up on a roof, and I have cell phone service, and I could upload my workout. And so it's been really cool that, like, okay, it doesn't matter if they're in San Diego or if they're like where they're stationed, and if they're in Provo, Utah, if they're in Germany, if they're in, you know, God knows where in the Middle East, they can continue to do this. And so it provides some continuity across their career to be able to do it. So I think for us, one of the things we're trying to do is both try to reach the individual service member from the bottom up, so that we can provide these stats and these data and show, like, listen, and they don't get hurt. They're not, what's it called? The brig? Is that the, what's the hospital? So am I showing my ignorance here? So whatever, you know, they don't get hurt. They don't get injured. They don't get pulled out.
The brig is a prison.
What's the hospital? What's that called? medical?
Like
Is
the
there
clinic.
Oh, there's not a term? Dang it, I want there to be a term for maybe I'll work on inventing the term for the anyway. Okay, so we don't want them to go to the break. That's definitely true. But also don't want them to go to the hospital. So and we work from the bottom up, right? And then here's my next question is what is the smallest unit? And I know they have different names and different, right? So is it like company, battalion, platoon?
Yeah,
or like
company or flight or platoon or something, squad, something like that.
Is that, again, there is, I think, for our service members listening who have already bought into this, I think one of the biggest impacts that they can make is to begin to gather workout partners. You have access to this stuff, train with the people you train with. Like that's the idea. And one of the advantages that Scott Conway talked about in our interview was that, you talked about that going on a group run, on a group ruck, right?
Yep.
One guy is getting a good workout out of that deal, the slowest one. And everybody else is like, we're just building morale, right?
Yeah.
It's really a morale building event, not a real true physical fitness event. But that same group can train together in the gym. And one guy could be squatting 405 and another guy could be squatting 145. And they all can train as hard as they can train together.
Right.
Encourage each other, spot each other, cheer each other on. By the way, have great competition. I think it's healthy competition. I think the military lends itself to that, right?
Yep.
So one of the reasons that we see this fit so well is that most military members understand there's some level of understanding of their need for strength training. And you've got I realize there are certainly plenty of females at this point now too, but you got a bunch of dudes run around, high testosterone, love to compete, and it gives them a great out for that. And so it builds that morale. So what do you think about like the strategy between building from bottom up versus top down, maybe both, maybe shooting, arrows both directions and seeing if we can meet in the middle?
You're exactly right. That is spot on. We need both. We need members of the military to recognize the importance of this type of activity and know that it's something that they can get themselves and their unit involved in right now. I mean, there's nothing that's going to limit them from doing it. They just need to get in touch with us, send me an email, and I will gladly take them on as clients and work with the entire unit. Happy to do that.
Sure.
But that means that they're paying for it out of their own pocket. And when we talk about this being a condition of employment and a requirement for them to be effective in their day-to-day job as a member of the military, we don't think that they should be paying for it. We think that the military as a whole should reinforce this type of change through policy and budget, supplying the necessary wickets and financials in order to make this sort of thing happen across the entire military. And so those decisions are going to take place far above the typical military member, right? Within that company level, that flight level, that's not where those decisions are going to be made. That's going to happen at least the battalion or the squadron. Far more likely it's going to happen at a installation or a wing or a numbered Air Force, major command, a division or a corps.
We're talking like 2,000 to 5,000 people, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, we're talking about a command structure where there's at least a colonel, an 06 at the top, probably more likely a flag officer, general officer, admiral, or something like that. Those are the people who are going to be able to make these kinds of budgetary and policy decisions. But they're not going to do it until they see that there is a return on investment. And so absolutely has to happen at the bottom, but it also absolutely has to happen at the higher levels of the military organization.
Right. That makes sense. This kind of stuff is not cheap. And so I can understand why they would want to see the data to know they don't want to take the risk and pull the trigger with taxpayers' money, not knowing if there's actually going to be a return on investment. And so I think that's why the individual soldier, the smaller units, even, 7, 8, 10 people within a specific unit training together and making sure that we've got good data. One of the things I love about what we're able to do is we're able to collect such good aggregate data. And again, protecting the individual all the time, not sharing individual data, but and the more people we have to do this, the better the aggregate data is, right? If you've got a pool of, well, here's what 3 people did, well, like, okay, that could be outliers. But, at the point that you can go, well, here's 100, here's what we've done with 100 service members. And it's made a big difference. Then all of a sudden you can start to make the splashes up the ladder, I think.
And we already have that 100, that large number of members of the military who, like you said earlier, are spending their own money on doing this. I mean, take me as an example. I've been a client with Barbell Logic since May of 2017. And so I have my entire training history in the Barbell Logic system, and you can see for sure the progress that I have made over those almost 4 years now. I'm far stronger, far more healthy, far more capable in my day-to-day responsibilities because of the time that I have spent working with a coach who, by the way, is also a member of the military or was at one point. And so you take my individual example and you scale that across hundreds. And now we have that aggregate data that we can share with those decision makers at the highest levels of the military to say, yes, this works. And we would love to partner with the Army, with the Air Force, with the Marines, the Navy, Coast Guard, Space Force, you name it. We want to help all of those members of the military to make progress like I have and the rest of our military clients have, and scale that across the entire organization.
Yeah, that's good. I think being able to provide that data of here are the continued PFT numbers, here are the continued standards that branch of service has set, here are the progress points for our clients, but also here are their strength improvements, here are their, waist to height or waist to body weight or waist to neck sort of improvements. Here's the data on the medicalization of, or lack thereof, medicalization for these, i.e. they've been combat ready the entire time, right? And you can just start to go down the line and hopefully start to change the thought process, the sort of philosophical idea of helping there to be an understanding of awareness of why we need strength. And as we start to get that, I think then we're able to show, one, this is why we need to pursue expert coaching, because it really is tough to do this and do this right. As a matter of fact, we've had lots of service members come to us who have already been strength training, but have been hurt. They've hurt themselves. And one of the things I think we're up against is that when you do this wrong, when you do it overboard, when you do it with lots of high impact, one of the problems that I've argued about CrossFit, and by the way, I am very thankful for CrossFit. I don't want to throw them under the bus at all. They are really the group that exposed thousands and thousands and thousands of service members, really even during time of war for us, to barbells and what they could, the benefit that they could have. The downside was there was a lot of high impact stuff. And because you got a bunch of people who compete and compete hard, and again, a bunch of military who are just, they're balls to the wall all the time, they come to us hurt. And then we're able to go, okay, hold on. We can still continue to get you stronger, and you don't have to be, not only do you not have to be hurt, we're going to make sure that we build up the resilience so that you're not going to get hurt in the future. And I think until we do that, then we're not going to see being able to leverage and reinforce with that policy and budget. But I think once we are, then it's time to start to go, okay, hey, now we can start to reinforce this. Because I agree, these members of the military should not be paying for this out of their own pocket. This is something that clearly has tremendous benefit for our members of the military. We can find common ground and meet in the middle to figure out how can we scale this and train more members of the military so that we're not changing the lives of 100 military members, but we're changing the lives of thousands. That's doable.
Yeah, the military in a whole recognizes that there is a need for a change. Like we said, the Army has rolled out the new ACFT. The Air Force is currently looking at making changes to its PT process. And we know that there is a desire, even at the highest levels, to make these kinds of changes. The problem is that they're looking internally to solve it. And they shouldn't do that. They should hire expert coaches who have already solved all of these issues. Who are leveraging the technology. And, the military loves technology. That's why they spend, $200 million on an F-35 or a new tank or, even.
Which, by the way, on a side note, typically the militaries, they're not building those things.
Right.
So they will spend the money on the experts. Like, they're not making their own airplanes, I don't think, right? They're not making the rockets. Like, we have these companies that they hire as contractors, but they go, oh, these are the experts. These are where the engineers are. Right, they're building the thing, and so that we can use the thing. And so it's a great point to say. I mean, the military spends, I would assume, billions of dollars every year on contracts with experts for various fields to build the thing or do the thing that they recognize that that's where the expert is. Right, it doesn't take a trained soldier to build a rocket ship. That's that takes an aerospace engineer and actually a team of thousands of aerospace engineers. And so they go to Boeing or SpaceX or, whatever. You got these companies like Lockheed and all these companies over the years that are the contractors that they go, we recognize that we have to spend some money here to get the thing from the expert. So really one of the things I think we have to do is change the idea of the need for developing fitness and combat readiness in our armed service members to be done by outside experts, right? It's got to be delegated outside the field. So
absolutely.
It's a great point. What happens if it doesn't change? So I think we recognize that this is probably going to come later than we want it to. Like this might be something that takes 20 years down the road to actually achieve. Yeah. And so what happens? What's the fallout if the culture doesn't change? If 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, we're still putting on our shorty shorts and running together and nobody's lifting. We don't have a culture of strength. What's that look like?
I mean, the rest of the world is recognizing the value of strength. That is happening. We're seeing this play out across private industry and certainly at the individual level, people pursuing strength for their own benefit. And that's not limited just to people here in the United States. It's happening across the world. And so that includes some enemies of the United States, right? And one of the big discussions that's going on right now is the return of great power competition, and that the United States specifically is looking at near peer rivals like China and Russia and needing to find ways to maintain an advantage over them.
Sure.
Now, like we were just saying about technology, that's usually the way that the military likes to solve those kinds of problems is, well, we just need more, better, faster technology to make sure that we keep that edge over our enemies. But the human still remains as the limiting factor, right? If you put somebody into the cockpit of a jet, they can only fly so far and so long before the body starts to break down and they have to return to base, right? And so there's a possibility here that if we don't change the way that we approach this, that will be the thing that our enemies get right and enables the advantage over us. There's a real possibility that we could lose the next war, whatever that war ends up being, whether it's with a near peer rival or it's something similar to what we've been involved with, the global war on terror. Whatever the war looks like, there is a possibility we could lose it because the human is the limiting factor in the projection of power.
Yeah.
And so if we want to prepare ourselves to not lose, just like we've been discussing this whole time, we need to address the human who is involved in whatever use of the technology, whether they're flying a jet, driving a tank, firing a rifle, or back at the base, pushing papers. Everybody needs to be prepared and ready to take the fight to the enemy.
Yeah, there's this mindset I think that occurs where, and it doesn't just apply to military, but I really believe that it's our job to be the best we can possibly be at the thing we're called to do. Right? So like if you're a trash man, you better be the best damn trash man on the planet. Like there's no shame in that. I'm not using that as a shameful position.
Right.
Like what's shameful is cashing it in, is having the job and just, it's like office space. Like, I'd say in any given 8-hour day, I do about 15 minutes of work. That's the problem, right? And I'm not saying that that's what's going on in the military. What I'm saying is I think there are these, and what I think you're saying is there are some holes, there's some deficiencies that if we can educate the military on those holes, why wouldn't they want to step up and create better, stronger, faster, more resilient, less chance to be injured soldiers, Marines, different services of the military? So to me, that's a no-brainer, right? Like it's the same thing. Like if we found out there was this technology that made things better, we're going to pursue it because it gives us a leg up. So my wonder is in the extreme explosion of the technological advancement we've made, especially over the past 2 decades or so, if some of the physical advancement has sort of been left to the wayside to go like, it's not that important anymore. And yet everybody I know that's gone to Afghanistan or Iraq or needs to land from helicopters to go kill Osama bin Laden, it's still humans kicking indoors. There's still a lot of that going on. And so, and certainly, and I don't know exactly what it looks like for the Air Force or for the Navy, but I know for the Marines and the Army, everyone is an infantryman. Like everyone is trained to be a rifleman, to be in the, like, I don't know if it's the same in the others, but like that's part of, and like you said, there's like obviously a huge percentage of the soldiers and Marines as they go through their career are not infantrymen, yet they're all trained that way because they have to be combat ready when necessary.
I mean, there's an argument to be made that the physical fitness standards that we've been talking about are not necessary for the future as they have been in the past. I mean, you take an airman, a computer terminal connected through the internet to the enemy, they can shut down entire electrical grids and, turn off nuclear test sites or whatever. You can make the argument that one person with a computer terminal is far more damaging to the enemy than a Marine with a rifle, right?
Sure.
But what happens if that one airman or that one person at the computer gets hurt just picking up groceries? They can't show up to work, right? Now you've completely lost that capability. And so there's still the argument to be made.
Yeah, how important is it for that guy to train? And not just about not getting hurt picking up groceries, but like what we see, this refining power that occurs. And I'm really not trying to get philosophical, but we see this thing that happens when we do things that are voluntarily hard, right? Like when we choose, like just like you said, you kind of get out of basic, you get out of your basic sort of training, and the armed forces are like, hey, we're not going to keep forcing you. We're not going to train together. Like you're going to have to take the responsibility now to do this thing. But this guy who is sitting at a computer, who has tremendous amounts of impact for the good of our country, like how much more sharp is he that he got up this morning and he squatted and he deadlifted and then did 20 minutes of HIIT exercise and then came to work sharp, ready, focused. Like that guy's better at his job, even if he's not kicking indoors.
Yeah. We've made the argument that everybody who is going to wear the uniform, who is involved in that support and logistical piece of projecting power, needs to be at the top of their game, no matter what. That should be the baseline, right? And so we can see that not only is there a huge risk to not doing that, in that we could potentially lose a war, but if we flip that on the other side and say, what if everybody is at that level all the time? Hey, maybe there's a potential that our enemies see how freaking capable we are, and they don't ever want to start a war to begin with, because they know that that airman who is at that computer terminal is the best, is strong, is capable both physically and mentally. And so everyone across the entire organization of the military is ready to fight. Then our enemies are going to say, no, thanks. We don't want to touch that.
Right. What a wonderful benefit of being the best, being understood as the best across the board, holistically, WHO, holistically, in that sometimes it just avoids the fight altogether. Right. Which is far better for everyone. So that's awesome. Thank you for this conversation. It's been really good. So if you're listening out there, all the way from, the kid that's going into basic, that's 18 years old, the private, all the way up to officers, commanding officers in the Army, up to the commander in chief, if you're listening, Mr. President, as well. Like it probably wouldn't be the first time that the president listened to Barbell Logic podcast. Right. So, we can help. We want to help. And so best way to find you, Colin, you're probably a great person to reach out to just, and by the way, this is not as much as really, we want this to be a general understanding of why we need strength, not a commercial for Barbell Logic. And the same will apply if you reach out to Colin. It's not a sales pitch. Colin loves to just talk to people about the need for this thing. And so what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah. Send me an email at cslade@barbell-logic.com. It'll be in the show notes. You can reach out to me there. Happy to have the conversation about how to scale strength training to individual members of the military or a unit or an entire force.
Yeah. Love to help. So Colin Slade, that's SLADE, Slade at barbell-logic.com. You can also just find him on the website. Pretty easy to find. You can click his emails on there as well. Reach out. And if you have any questions, we'd love to talk to you about it. If you're interested in bringing strength training to your group, whether that's a group of 5 or 6 people who want to just train together and start to just kick ass and take names, we'd love to help. And then all the way up to any larger groups as well. So thanks for being on the podcast. Thanks for helping be a little bit, Colin is somewhat of a brainchild here and helping us put together this series. So thank you for the
my pleasure.
For the kind of architecture you've put together in the series, and hope you all are getting value out of this. If you have had some value out of this, we'd love for you to do 2 things. Share it, please, with specifically with a service member or somebody who's impacted by this would be wonderful. Share this series with them. And 2, we'd always love to have a 5-star review. It helps us tremendously just wherever you listen to podcasts, whether that's at I think what was called iTunes and is now Apple Podcast or Overcast or Spotify, whatever. Love to have a 5-star review there. Say nice things about us. Or you can always email the show and give us critique as well. We listen to those. We are always trying to get better every single day, every single show. So, hey, thanks for being on the show again, man.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.